Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into a book that's become a modern classic for a reason, Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, absolutely. A classic really unpacks how our minds work and sometimes, maybe how they don't work quite as well as we think they do.
Exactly right. Full of those aha moments that make you question your own rationality.
Yeah,
I think that's what makes it so valuable.
I totally agree. And understanding those quirks in our thinking can be really helpful in everyday life.
Absolutely. So let's start with Kahneman himself.
Okay.
His background is fascinating, particularly that story about his encounter with a German officer during the Holocaust.
Hmm.
That experience seems to have been what really sparked his lifelong interest in the irrational side of human behavior.
Yeah, it's a powerful story, and it really sets the stage for the whole book. Kahneman realizing that even in those moments of chaos and danger, human behavior can be so unpredictable, even defy logic.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that our minds aren't these perfectly rational machines we often think they are.
Yeah.
So how does that personal experience connect to the core concept of the book, this idea of two systems of thinking?
Well, Kahneman argues that our minds operate on two levels. System one, which is fast, intuitive, automatic, and system two, which is slower, more deliberate, more analytical.
Okay, so it's kind of like having two different operating systems running at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
think about something as simple as walking down the street.
Right.
You don't have to consciously think about every step you take. That's system one at work.
Right.
But if someone asks you, like, a complex math problem, you have to stop, you have to engage that system two to really work through it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I remember Kahneman describing an experiment where researchers actually tracked people's pupil dilation
Oh, yeah.
while they were thinking.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and their pupils would dilate when they were tackling those challenging mental tasks, indicating that system two was engaged, working hard.
So cool.
Really fascinating to see those physical responses reflecting our cognitive processes.
It really highlights how much is going on beneath the surface that we're not even aware of.
Right.
But, if our brains are capable of this deep analytical thinking, why do we rely so much on system one? That, more intuitive, often irrational system.
Well, because our brains are, as Kahneman puts it, they're wired to be efficient, or as he kind of playfully says, lazy.
Right. I love that quote. Our brains are wired to be efficient, or let's just call it what it is. Our brains are lazy.
Yeah, it's so true.
So true.
It captures that tendency to opt for mental shortcuts, what Kahneman calls heuristics.
Uh-huh.
And these shortcuts, they can be helpful in a lot of situations, allowing us to make quick decisions without getting bogged down.
Right. It's about conserving mental energy.
Exactly. But, and there's always a but, right?
Yeah.
The downside is that these heuristics can also lead to systematic biases in our thinking.
Like that example he gives about kidney cancer rates.
Oh, right. He points out that rural areas tend to have both the highest and lowest kidney cancer rates in the U.S., but it's not because of something in the environment. It's a statistical quirk.
Right.
Smaller populations just tend to have more extreme results, both positive and negative.
Yeah, it's so easy to misinterpret data and jump to conclusions, especially when, system one is calling the shots.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Think about how often we form opinions based on, just anecdotes or personal experiences rather than looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good reminder to be cautious about drawing conclusions from small sample sizes, both in our personal lives and when we're evaluating information out in the world.
For sure.
So what are some of the other biases that Kahneman explores in the book?
Well, one of the most fascinating is the anchoring effect.
Okay.
He describes a study where students were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations.
Okay.
But before they answered, they spun a roulette wheel rigged to land on either 10 or 65.
Wait, so the roulette wheel was totally irrelevant to the actual question.
Totally irrelevant. But here's the thing. Those who spent a 10, they guessed a much lower percentage of African nations than those who spun a 65.
No way.
Yeah, that random number acted as an anchor, influencing their subsequent judgments.
That's wild. So even when we think we're being objective, our thinking can be swayed by these totally arbitrary factors.
It really can.
Wow.
Makes you wonder how many of our decisions are influenced by these, subtle, unconscious biases.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling.
It is.
It makes me think about that supermarket experiment that he mentioned,
Oh, yeah.
where they put up a sign that said, limit 12 cans per person for a particular brand of soup.
Right. And even though there was no actual shortage, sales for that soup just went through the roof.
Wow.
The limit, it acted as an anchor, making people think, oh, I need to stock up. Classic example of how marketers can use our biases to their advantage.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It
Like we're
is.
being manipulated without even realizing it.
Well, awareness is the first step to counteracting those biases.
That's true. That's true. It's like we're constantly being nudged in a certain direction without even knowing it.
Right. And another one of those nudges, another bias that he talks about is loss aversion.
Oh, yeah.
That pain of losing $100, it feels way worse than the pleasure of gaining $100.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen that play out in my own life.
Yeah.
And I think his explanation makes so much sense, you know?
Yeah.
It's like we're hardwired to avoid those losses
Yeah.
more than we are to chase gains.
It's such a powerful force in our decision making, He gives that example of like a simple coin toss bet.
Mm-hmm.
Heads, you win $150. Tails, you lose $100.
Okay.
Even though the expected value is positive, most people wouldn't take that bet.
I wouldn't. No way.
Right. It's that fear of losing that $100
Right.
that holds us back, even though the potential gain is greater.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And that ties into another concept he talks about, the endowment effect. The idea that once we own something, we suddenly value it way more.
Oh, I've experienced that.
Right.
Yeah, I get so attached to things.
Even if it hasn't changed.
Even if I don't really use them anymore, it's that feeling of it's mine.
Yes.
I don't want to give it up, even if it's not really logical.
Exactly. And there's this experiment in the book where they gave people either a $10,000 bonus or 12 days of vacation time.
Okay.
And, the value was theoretically the same,
Right.
but people were so reluctant to trade what they'd already been given.
It's that sense of ownership, right?
It is.
It creates some kind of emotional bond that goes beyond beyond the logic of it.
It totally does. It's something to be mindful of next time you're selling something or negotiating a price,
Yeah.
Don't let that feeling of ownership kind of cloud your judgment.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about anchoring, loss aversion, the endowment effect,
Uh-huh.
all examples of, our system one thinking leading us astray.
Right.
But Kahneman also dives into those situations where system two, that more analytical side, can get things wrong too, right?
Absolutely. One area where System 2 can really trip us up is in understanding statistics
Okay.
and probabilities, particularly this concept of regression to the mean.
Oh, yeah. And he tells that great story about his experience training pilots in the Israeli Air Force.
Yes.
He noticed that when pilots performed exceptionally well, praise seemed to lead to worse performance the next time around.
Mm-hmm.
But when they performed poorly, criticism seemed to actually lead to improvement.
Yeah, it was so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
It seemed like praise was backfiring and punishment was working, but what he realized was that it wasn't about the praise or criticism at all.
Oh, interesting.
It was regression to the mean.
Okay.
Those extreme performances, they just tend to even out over time.
So it was just statistical noise.
Exactly. And this happens in all sorts of situations, not just pilot training.
Like in sports.
Yeah, someone might have a hot streak, but it's probably not going to last forever.
Right, right.
Or in business, a company might have a sudden surge in profits,
Mm-hmm.
but it's important to consider, is that sustainable or is it just a temporary blip?
This has huge implications for how we evaluate performance,
It does.
both our own and that of others. If we don't account for that regression to the mean,
Right.
we might be misattributing success or failure to the wrong factors.
And make decisions based on faulty assumptions.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder to be cautious about attributing outcomes solely to skill or effort, Chance often plays a bigger role than we realize.
It makes me think about that quote, many times what we think works is simply a misunderstanding of the phenomenon known as regression to the mean. We try to come up with explanations for everything, but sometimes it's just randomness.
It is. It's a good reminder to be humble.
Yeah.
Recognize the limits of our understanding.
Absolutely. Speaking of limits, Kahneman also tackles the whole idea of predicting the future.
He does.
And he's not super optimistic.
Not really, no. He argues that most expert predictions are no more accurate than random guesses.
Wow.
Especially in fields that are complex and unpredictable.
Like the stock market.
Yeah, prime example.
Okay.
So many factors influencing those stock prices, it's virtually impossible to predict those short-term fluctuations with any consistency.
So much for those stock-picking gurus.
Right. And Kahneman's own research even showed that, professional stockbrokers couldn't consistently outperform the market.
Huh. So if predicting the future is so difficult, how do we make decisions when we have to consider those potential outcomes?
It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
But Kahneman does offer some guidance. He says that for expert predictions to be reliable, the field has to be inherently predictable, like, forecasting the weather
Yeah.
or calculating the lifespan of a light bulb.
So there are some areas where expertise does matter.
Yes, but there's another crucial factor.
Okay.
That expertise has to be gained through structured, long-term training. It's not just about having experience in a field, it's about deliberate practice.
So it's not just gut feelings. It's about, uh, you know, it's about learning the rules of the game.
Exactly. And even then, there's always an element of uncertainty.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that our predictions are just that, predictions, not guarantees.
Okay, so with all these biases and these limits on our thinking, are there any like practical tools that we can use to actually make better decisions?
He does offer some solutions, yeah.
Okay.
One technique that I find really helpful is the premortem method.
The pre-mortem method. Okay, tell me more.
So imagine you're about to launch a new product or embark on some big project.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on all the reasons why it will succeed, gather your team
Okay.
and imagine that the project has already failed miserably a year from now,
Oh, wow.
and then work backward to figure out what went wrong.
So you're doing an autopsy on a project that hasn't even started.
Exactly. By imagining that worst-case scenario, you can anticipate those potential problems. Develop contingency plans. It forces you to think more critically,
Yeah.
challenge those assumptions.
That's a great idea.
It is. It's like you're tapping into the wisdom of hindsight before you even make the decision.
Yeah, exactly. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I remember reading that even Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, uses a similar approach.
Oh, yeah.
With his team, he holds these meetings titled How Alibaba Went Bankrupt
Wow.
to brainstorm potential risks and challenges.
If it's good enough for Jack Ma,
Right.
it's probably good enough for us.
It sounds like a great way to inject a dose of realism into the decision-making process.
It really is. And it can be applied to all sorts of decisions, not just business ventures.
Yeah.
Want to plan a big event? Imagine it's a complete disaster.
Yeah.
Figure out why.
I love that it's such a simple concept, but it has the potential to be really powerful.
It does.
And it kind of speaks to one of the bigger themes in the book, right? That
Yeah.
we're often overconfident in our own judgments and predictions.
The premortem method helps us to acknowledge those limitations and to plan for the unexpected. It's about being prepared, not just optimistic.
I love that. So we've talked about, how to combat that overconfidence, how to make more informed decisions. But what about the role of emotions?
Yeah.
Kahneman makes it clear that that our feelings really do play a huge role in how we think,
They do.
even when we're trying to be rational.
Emotions are definitely intertwined with our decision-making processes.
Right.
Remember loss aversion.
Yeah.
That's driven by the emotion of fear.
Right.
Fear of losing something we value. It's not just a cold calculation.
Right. There's a powerful emotional component there.
Exactly. And Kahneman talks about another phenomenon that he calls framing effects,
Oh, yeah.
where the way a choice is presented
Right.
can influence our emotional response and ultimately our decision.
Like that example of the 2 strategies for combating a disease outbreak.
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
In one frame, the choice is presented in terms of lives saved.
Right.
In the other frame, it's presented in terms of lives lost.
Okay.
Even though the choices are mathematically equivalent, people tend to choose differently depending on the frame.
It's not just about the numbers, it's about the emotional impact.
It is, and this has huge implications for how we communicate choices,
Wow.
whether it's in healthcare, marketing, public policy.
It makes you think about how easily we can be swayed by, a well-crafted message, even if the underlying facts are the same.
Right. It's a reminder to be critical thinkers and to look
Mhm.
beyond that surface presentation of choices.
To not just go with that gut reaction, but
Yeah.
to really consider the different ways that a situation can be framed.
Exactly. And to be aware of how others might be using framing to influence our decisions.
Right, because it's happening all the time. Yeah, it feels like we're just constantly bombarded with information and choices these days.
We are.
So much so that we don't even realize how those framing effects are shaping our decisions.
That's why it's so important to cultivate that awareness of these biases,
Yeah,
our own and those of others.
right. And thinking fast and slow is such a great toolkit for doing just that.
It
It's
is.
given us so much to think about already, but I'm curious, are there any other big takeaways that you think are really important for people to remember?
Well, one that really stands out to me is this idea that our happiness isn't just determined by, you know, objective circumstances, but also by how we remember our experiences.
Oh, yes. He talks about this in the context of the peak end rule, right?
Exactly. The peak-on rule suggests that we judge an experience based on two key moments: the most intense point, the peak, and the very end.
Okay.
The duration of the experience, or like the sum of all the moments, it doesn't matter as much as we might think.
So even if an experience is mostly positive, a negative ending can kind of like completely taint the memory.
It often does, yeah, unfortunately. Think about
Uh-huh.
like a vacation that was mostly enjoyable but ended with, a terrible flight delay or lost luggage. Ugh, yeah.
That negative ending can overshadow all the good memories.
I've definitely had trips like that.
Right.
It's frustrating because you try to focus on the good parts, but that negative ending just kind of sticks with you.
It's just the way our brains are wired, but, the good news is that the peak end rule works both ways.
Okay.
If we can create a positive peak and a positive ending to an experience, it can boost our overall memory and satisfaction, even if there were some bumps along the way.
That's a good reminder to be intentional about how we shape our experiences,
Yes.
especially when it comes to things we can control, like planning events or even just ending the day on a positive note.
Exactly. Small changes can have a big impact on our memories and, in our overall happiness.
Absolutely. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from the two systems of thinking to heuristics and biases, the power of framing, even the peak end rule. It's such a rich and insightful book. I always discover something new every time I revisit it.
Me too. It's definitely a book that I'll be recommending to everyone I know.
As you.
So as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, if someone were to ask you why they should read Thinking Fast and Slow, what would be your elevator pitch?
I'd say this book is a must-read for anyone who wants to understand those hidden forces that shape our thoughts, our feelings, our decisions. It's a fascinating exploration of human psychology,
Yeah.
and a practical guide to making better choices in all areas of life.
Well said. Thinking Fast and Slow is a true masterpiece, and I'm so glad we had this chance to dive deep into its insights together.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We hope you've enjoyed it and that you'll join us again next time for another exploration of some fascinating topic.
See you then.
Until then, keep thinking, both fast and slow.